Chapter 1 of The Finding of Haldgren. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Richard Kilmer. The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. S.O.S. The venerable president of the Federation Aeronautique Internationale had been speaking. He paused now to look out over the sea of faces that filled the great hall in serried waves. He half turned that he might let his eyes pass over the massed company on the platform with him, the Stratosphere Control Board, and they had called in their representatives from the far corners of the earth to hear the memorable words of this aged man. From the waiting audience came no slightest sound. The men and women were as silent as that other audience listening and watching in every hamlet of the world, wherever radio and television reached. Again the figure of the president was drawn erect. The scanty white hair was thrown back from his forehead. He was speaking. And this vast development has come within the memory of one man. I, speaking to you here in this year of 1974, have seen it all come to pass, and now I am overwhelmed with the wonder of it, even as I was when those two Americans first flew at Kitty Hawk. I myself saw that. I saw with these eyes the first crude engine-bearing kites. I saw them from 1914 to 1918, tempered and perfected in the furnace of war. I saw the coming of detonite and the beginning of our air transport of today. And always I have seen brave men who smiled grimly as they took those first crude controls in their hands, who laughed and waved to us as they took off in the flying coffins of the Great War, who had the courage to dare the unknown dangers of the high levels, and who first threw their ships through the repelling area and blazed the air trails of a new world. And today, I who have seen all this, stand before you and say, thank God, the spirit of brave men goes on. It is never ended, that adventurer strain, that race of Viking men. We have two of them here tonight. The whole world is pausing this instant, wherever men are on land or water or air, to do honor to these two. They do not know why they are here. They have been summoned by the Stratosphere Control Board, which has delegated to me the honor of making the announcement. The tall figure was commandingly erect. For an instant the fire of youth had returned to him. Walter Harkness, he called. Chester Bullard, stand forth that the eyes of the world may see. Two men arose from among the members of the board and came hesitantly forward. Strongly contrasting was the darkly handsome face of Harkness, man of wealth and pilot of the second class, and the no less pleasing features of Chet Bullard, master pilot of the world. For Bullard's curling hair was as golden as the triple star upon his chest that proclaimed his standing to the world and all the air above. The speaker was facing them. He turned away for a moment that he might bow to a girl who was still seated next to the chair where Walt Harkness had been. To Mrs. Harkness he said, who, until 1 month ago, was Mademoiselle Delacour of our own beloved France, I shall have something further to say. She, too, has been summoned by the board, but for now I address these two. Again he was facing the two men, and now he was speaking directly to them. Pilot Harkness and Master Pilot Bullard, for you the world has been forced to create a new honor, a new mark of the world's esteem. For you two have done what never men have done before. We who have preceded you have subdued the air, but you, gentlemen, you, the first of all created beings to do so, have conquered space. And to you, because of your courage, because of your dauntless pioneer spirit, because of the unconquerable will that drove you and the inventive genius that made it possible, because all these have set you above us more ordinary men, since they have made you the first men to fly through space, it is my privilege now to show you the honor in which you are held by the whole world." The firm voice quavered for a moment. The old hands trembled as they lifted a blazing gem from its velvet case. "Chester Bullard, Master Pilot, on behalf of the Stratosphere Control Board, I bestow upon you—" "Stop!" Every radio phone in the world must have echoed that sharp command. Every television screen must have shown to a breathless audience the figure whose blond hair was awry, whose lean face was afire with protest, as Chet Bullard sprang forward with upraised hand. "You're wrong, dead wrong. You're making a mistake. I can't accept that." The master pilot's voice was raised in earnest protest. He seemed, for the moment, unaware of the thousands of eyes that were upon him, heedless of the gasp of amazement that swept sibilantly over the vast audience like a hissing wave breaking upon the beach. And then his face flushed scarlet, though his eyes still held steadily upon the startled countenance of the man who stood transfixed, while the jewel in his hand took the light out of the nitron illuminators above and shot it back in a glory of rainbow hues. From the seated group on the platform a man came forward. Commander of the air, this iron gray man. He was head of the Stratosphere Control Board, supreme authority on all matters that concerned the air levels of the whole world. Commander in chief of all men who laid hands on the controls of a ship. He spoke quietly now, and Chet Bullard, at his first word, snapped instantly to salute, then stood silently waiting. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded the voice of authority. The voice seemed soft, almost gentle, yet each syllable carried throughout the hall with the unmistakable hint of the hardness of a steel-like shell beneath the words. "The eyes of the world are upon us here. The whole world is gathered to do you honor. Is it possible that you are refusing that which we offer? Why? You will speak, please." And Chet Bullard, standing stiffly at attention before his commander, spoke in a tone rendered almost boyish by embarrassment. "I can't accept, sir. Pilot Harkness will bear me out in this. You would decorate us for being the first to navigate space, but we are not the first." "Continue," ordered the quiet voice as Chet paused. "You refer to Haldgren, probably." "To Pilot Haldgren, sir." "This is absurd. Haldgren was lost. It is supposed that he fell back into the sea or struck some untraveled part of Earth." "I have checked over his data, sir. It is my opinion that he did not fall. His figures indicate that he must have thrown his ship beyond the gravitational influence of Earth." The commander eyed the master pilot coldly. "And because you think that your conclusions are more accurate than those of my own investigating committee, you refuse this honor?" "Attention!" he snapped sharply. "The entire service of air is being rendered ridiculous by your conduct. I command you to accept this decoration." "You are exceeding your authority, sir. I refuse." Suddenly the frozen quiet of the commander's face was flushed red with rage. "Give me that insignia," he demanded, and pointed to the triple star on Chet Bullard's breast. "Your commission is revoked." To the last breathless spectator in the farthest end of the great hall, the white pallor of Chet Bullard's face must have been apparent. One hand moved toward the emblem on his blouse, the cherished triple star of a master pilot of the world. Then the hand paused. "I have still another reason for believing Haldgren is alive," he said in a cold and carefully emotionless voice. "Are you interested in hearing it?" "Speak," ordered the commander. Chet Bullard, still wearing the triple star, crossed quickly to a phone panel in the speaker stand at one side of the stage. He jerked out an instrument. The buzz of excited whispering that had swept the audience gave place to utter silence. Each quiet, incisive word that Chet spoke was clearly heard. He gave his call number. "Bullard, Master Pilot, First Class, number US-1. Calling Dr. Roach at Allied Observatory, Mount Everest. Microwave, please, and connect through for telephoto projection." A few breathless seconds passed while Chet aimed an instrument of gleaming chromium and glass whose cable connections vanished in the phone panel recess. He focused it upon an artificially darkened screen above and behind the grouped figures on the stage. Then, "Dr. Roach?" Chet queried. And before the whole audience, the dark screen came to life to show a clear-cut picture of a man who sat at a telescope, whose hand held a radio phone, and who glanced up frowningly and said, "Yes, this is Dr. Roach." Chet's response was immediate. "Bullard speaking. Chet Bullard at New York. When I was in your observatory yesterday, Doctor, you said that you had seen flashes of light on the moon. You remember that, don't you? You saw them some months ago while I was on the Dark Moon." The man in that distant observatory was no longer scowling at this interruption of his work. His smile was echoed by the cordial tone of his voice that rang clearly through the great hall. "Correct, Mr. Bullard. An observer at our 200-inch reflector reported them on 2 successive nights. They were inside the crater of Hercules." From his place at the center of the stage, the waiting commander of air protested. "Come, come. We know all about that, Bullard. Are you trying to say—" The voice of the astronomer was speaking again. "You will no doubt be interested to know that the lights occurred again yesterday at about this time. Let me see if they are on now. I will have the 200-inch instrument used as before, and will show you what we see. Watch your screen, but don't expect to find any substantiation of your wild theory that these lights have a human origin." He laughed softly. "No atmosphere to speak of there, you know. We have determined that very definitely." On the screen the picture of the smiling man flashed off. It was replaced by an unflickering darkness that came abruptly into softly shaded light. There was an expanse of volcanic terrain and a round orifice of tremendous size, where the sunlight cast black shadows. Other shaded portions about were like rocky, broken ground. To Chet, staring at the strange conformation, came the quick sense of hanging above that ground and looking down upon it. And he knew that in New York he was looking through a great telescope down under the world and was staring straight down into the throat of an extinct volcano on the moon. There were few wonders of the modern world that could thrill the master pilot with any feeling of amazement, but here was a new experience. He would have spoken, would have ejaculated some word of wonder, but for the new light that claimed his eyes and brain. The volcano, even in death, was ages old, its cold desolation showing plainly on the screen. No fires poured now from a hot throat. The molten sea that once had raged within had hardened and choked that vast throat with rock that had frozen to make one enormous plain. Ringed about by the jagged sides of the tremendous volcano, the floor within seemed smooth by comparison, except for another depression at its upper edge. Here was another and smaller crater inside the great ringed wall of Hercules. The light of the sun struck slantingly across to throw one side of the gigantic cup into shadow. while the opposite rim blared brightly in the lunar dawn. And within the smaller crater, too, one side was dead black with shadow. Dead. No moving thing. No sign of life or indication that life might ever have been. A dead world, this. Its utter desolation struck Chet's half-uttered exclamation to a hoarse whisper of dismay. In all the universe, what less likely place might one discover wherein to look for man? His gaze was held in fascinated hopelessness on the barren, mountainous ring, on the inner inverted cone, on the shadow within that smaller crater, on a tiny pinpoint of light that was flashing there. He hardly knew when he raised one trembling hand and pointed, while a voice quite unlike his own said huskily: "Look, look! I told you it was so. There in that little crater. It's signaling. 3 dots, now 3 dashes, 3 dots again. The old SOS, the old call for help. It's Haldgren." Again the screen showed the smiling scientist. "Caught them just right," he said, "and glad to be of service. Now, if there's anything else I can do..." "Thanks," said Chet, in that same strained voice. "Thanks. There's nothing else." A switch clicked beneath his hand, and once more the screen was dark. Those dots and dashes, the old SOS. Who could doubt now? Chet was telling himself this when the commander's voice broke in harshly. "Even you must see the absurdity of this, Bullard. You have heard this astronomer tell you what the rest of us knew for ourselves, that there is no air on the moon, that it is impossible for a human being to live there, and you would have us believe that a man has lived there for 5 years? But I'm taking your distinguished record into account. I am overlooking your insubordination and the folly of your reasoning. Perhaps your feeling about Haldgren does you credit, but Haldgren is dead. Now, I am giving you another chance. I order you to come forward and receive this honor, which is an honor to the entire service of air." Chet was staring in open amazement. No air on the moon, this man had said, and what of that? Neither was there air in interplanetary space, yet he had traveled there. It was inconceivable that this imperious and dictatorial man could be so blind. "I can't do it, sir," he tried to explain. "You surely can't disregard that message, that old call for help. We were using that, you know, when Haldgren took off 5 years ago." No longer did a masking softness overlay the hard brittleness of the commander's voice. "Your star," he snapped. "You are no longer in the service, Bullard." But Chet Bullard, as he stepped forward that the commander might rip the triple star from his chest, was not alone. Walt Harkness was only a pilot of the second class, but he stripped the emblem from his own silken blouse and placed it in the commander's outstretched hand beside Chet's star. "Permit me, sir, to share Mr. Bullard's enviable humiliation," he observed with venomous courtesy, and added: "Whatever similar honors were in store for Mrs. Harkness and myself are respectfully declined. We, too, are of the opinion that Pilot Haldgren deserves them instead of us." For an instant Chet's flashing smile drew his face into friendly lines. "Thanks," he said. But all friendliness was erased as he swung back upon the commander. No thought now of the thousands of staring faces or the millions throughout the world who were watching him and were hearing his words. Chet Bullard clipped those words into curt phrases, and he shot them at his superior officer as if from a detonite gun. "You think your judgment better than mine. You've dropped me from the service, and you've got the power to make that stick. But you're wrong, sir, dead wrong, and I'll make you admit it, too. No, don't interrupt. I'm going to say what I please, and this is it, Commander. Hang on to that jewel you were giving me. Keep it ready, for I'm going to the moon. I'm going to find Haldgren, if he's still living when I get there. And at the least I will bring back some record to show he is the man we should honor." Haldgren, alive or dead, was the first man to conquer space. Neither Harkness nor I would steal an atom of his glory. "I'll have the proof when I come back. And when I come..." For an instant the ready grin that marked Chet's irresistible good nature lighted up his face with a silent echo of some laugh-provoking thought occurring in his mind. "When I do come, Commander, I will make you eat your words. It's you who will be out of the service then, laughed out." The Commander smiled too, smiled coldly, complacently, while his head shook. "Again you are mistaken," he told Chet. "Never again will you fly as much as 1 foot above Earth." And still Chet's grin persisted. "Commander," he said, "a man in your position should not make so many mistakes. I am going. I give you warning now. Going to the Moon. And you haven't enough patrol ships in all the air levels of Earth to hold me back once I'm on my way." And every television screen on Earth showed a remarkable scene. A red-faced, choleric commander of the air who shouted that a group of officers might leap forward to do his bidding. A dark-haired man and a girl who sprang beside him. The bodies of the two were interposed for an instant between the officers' weapons, and a fair-haired man. And the lean young man, with his shock of golden hair thrown back from his face, leaped like a panther in that same instant, drew himself to an open window, threw himself through, and vanished among the brilliant lights and black shadows of a New York night. But as he fought his way free of the throng outside, there came above the clamor of an excited crowd the voice of Walt Harkness in cryptic words. "The ship is yours, Chet." The fugitive heard Harkness call. "It's in cold storage for you." End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A dirty red freighter. Chet Bullard was more at home among the air lanes of Earth than he was on solid ground. But he oriented himself in an instant, knew he was on a cross street in the 300 zone, and saw ahead of him, not 100 feet away, the green glowing ring that marked a subway escalator. In the passing throng there were those who looked curiously at him. Chet checked his first headlong flight and dropped to an unhurried walk. About him, as he well knew, the air was filled with silent radio waves that were sounding the alarm in every sentry box of the great city. They would reach the aircraft terminals and the control room of every ship within a fixed radius. He had dared the wrath of one of the most powerful officials of Earth. No effort would be spared to run him down. His picture would be flashing within 10 minutes on every television screen of the Air Patrol, and Chet Bullard knew only one way to go. Of course they would be watching for him at the airports, yet he knew he must get away somehow, escape quickly, and find some corner of the world where he could hide. He was in the escalator, and wild plans were flashing through his mind as he watched the levels go past. First level, trains north and south, local service. Second level, express stop for North Shore lines. Third level, airport loop lines, transatlantic terminals. Chet Bullard, his hair still tangled on his hatless head, his blouse torn where a hand had ripped off the master pilot's emblem, stepped from the escalator to a platform, then to a cylindrical car that slid silently in before him and whose flashing announcement board proclaimed Hoover Airport Express, no intermediate stops. Would they be watching for him at the great Hoover terminal on the tip of Long Island? Chet assured himself silently that he would tell the world they would be. But even a fugitive may have friends, if he has been a master pilot and has a lean, likable face with a most disarming grin. Where would he go? He did not know. He had been bluffing a bit, and the commander had called him when his hand was weak. He had no least idea where he could find their ship. If only he had a chance for a word with Walt Harkness. Walt had been flying it, and had left it apparently in a storage hangar. But where? And what was it that Walt had called out? Chet was racking his brains to remember. "The ship is yours," Walt had shouted, and something about storage. But why should he have laid up the ship? Why should he have stored it? Chet saw the lights of subterranean stations flashing past as the car that held him rode silently through a tube that it touched not at all. He knew that magnetic rails made a grill work that surrounded the car, and that drew it on at terrific speed while suspending it in air. But he would infinitely have preferred the freedom of the high levels, and his own hand on a ship's controls. A ship, any ship, but preferably his ship and Walt's. And Walt had said something of storage, cold storage. The words seemed written before him in fiery lines. It was a moment before he knew what he had recalled. Then a slow smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he turned and stared through a window that showed only blackness. Cold storage. That was good work on Walt's part. He had been forced to shout the directions before them all, yet tell none of those others about him where the ship was hidden. Chet was picturing that place of cold storage as he smiled. The fact that it was some thousands of miles away troubled him not at all. The great Hoover terminal was a place where night never came. Its daylight tubes wove a network of light about the stupendous enclosure. Their almost silent hissing merged to an unceasing rush of sound, so soft as to be unheard through the scuffing feet and chattering voices of the ever hurrying crowds. From subways the impatient people came and went, and from highway stations where buses and private cars drove in and away. The clock in the squat tower swung its electrically driven hands toward the figure 22. There lacked but 2 hours of midnight, and a steady stream of aircraft came dropping down the shaft of green light that reached to and through the clouds. There would be many liners leaving on the hour. These that were coming in were private craft that spun their flashing helicopter-like giant emeralds in the green descending light, while the noise of their beating blades filled the air with a rush of sound. Outside the entrance to the passenger station, Chet Bullard withdrew himself from the surging press of hurrying men and women and slipped into a shadowed alcove. 2 passing figures in the gray and gold of the air patrol scanned the crowd closely. Chet drew himself into the deeper shadows and waited until they were by before he emerged and followed the shelter of a coffee house that extended toward another entrance to the field, where pilots and mechanics passed in and out. A bulletin board showed in changing letters of light the official assignment of landing space, and though every passing eye was turned toward it, Chet knew that each man was intent upon the board and not on the shadowed niche in the building behind it. He watched his chance and slipped into that shadow. Unseen, he could see them as they approached, men in the multicolored uniforms of many lines, who paused to read, to exchange bantering shop talk, and to pass on. Many voices. Storm area over the south shore up to level 6. You birds on the local runs had better watch your step. Coming down at Calcutta. Yeah, a dirty red-bottomed freighter that rammed him. I saw it take off 2 of his fans, but Shorty set the old girl down like a feather on the lift of the 4 fans he had left. You said it. Shorty's a real pilot. Another pause. Then a growling voice that proclaimed complainingly, "Lord, but I'm tired. All right, Spud, grin, you damned Irishman. But if you had been hauling the Commander all over Alaska today, and then got ordered out again just as you were set up for a good sleep, you'd be sore. What in thunder does he want his ship for tonight, I ask you?" Chet, crouching still lower in the little retreat, stiffened to attention at the reference to the Commander. So the big boss had ordered out his own cruiser again. He listened still more intently to the voice that replied, "Sure, and it's thankful you should be for holding the controls on a fine big cruiser like that, though between you and me, 'tis myself that don't envy you your job. Me and my old freighter, we go wallowing along, and tonight I'm taking her home for repairs, back to that factory in Russia where they made her, and the devil of a job it will be, for she handles with all the grace of a pig in a puddle." Chet risked a glance when the sound of heavy footsteps indicating that one of the two speakers had gone on alone to the pilot's gate. Before the huge bulletin board, in pilot's uniform and with the markings of a low-level man on his sleeve, stood the sturdy figure of the man called Spud. He started back at the sight of the face peering out at him, but Chet whispered a command, and the man moved closer to the hiding place behind the board. There were others coming in a laughing group up the walk. Daylight tubes illuminated the approach. Chet spoke hurriedly. "I'm in a devil of a mess, Spud. Will you lend me a hand? Will you stand by for rescue work?" And Spud studied the bulletin board as he growled, "Lend a hand? Yes, and the arm with it, Mr. Bullard. You stood by me once when I needed help, and now you ask will I stand by for rescue work? Till we crash, that's all, my boy." Spud's speech was tinged with the brogue of Erin. It grew perceptibly more pronounced as his quick emotions took hold of him. "Quiet," said Chet. "Wait till they pass." The newcomers stopped for no more than a glance. Then, "I'm demoted," Chet told the round-eyed man, who stared unbelievingly at the vacant place on Chet's blouse. "The air's hot with orders for my arrest. I've got to get out, and I've got to do it quick." And now there was only a trace of the brogue in Spud's voice. Chet knew the trick of the man's speech. Touch his heart, and his tongue would grow thick. Place him face to face with an emergency, and he would go cold and hard, while the good-natured phrasing of his native sod went from him, and he talked fast and straight. "The devil, you say!" exclaimed Spud. "What you've done I don't know, nor yet why you did it. But whatever it was, I don't believe you'd let that triple star go for less than a damned good reason. Now let me think. Let me think." A figure in gray and gold was approaching, a member of the Air Patrol. Spud's tongue was lively with good-natured raillery as he fell into step and drew the officer with him through the pilot's gate, while Chet, from his shadow, saw with satisfaction the apparent desertion. He had known Spud O'Malley of old. Spud was square, and Spud had wanted time for thinking. There were many who passed Chet's hiding place before a cautious whisper came to him, and he saw a hand that thrust a roll of clothing around the edge of the bulletin board. "Put 'em on," was the order of Spud, "and smear your yellow hair with that grease. Work fast, me boy." The command was no less imperative for being spoken beneath Spud's breath, and for the first time Chet's hopes soared high within him. It had all been so hopeless, the prospect of actual escape from the net that was closing about him. And now he unrolled the tight package of cloth to find a small can of black graphite lubricant done up in a jacket and blouse. Both were stained and smeared with grease. They were amply large. Chet did not bother to strip off his own blouse. He pulled on the other clothes over his own, and his face was alight with a grin of appreciation of Spud's attention to details as he took a daub of the grease, rubbed it on his hands, and then passed them through his hair. "Yellow," Spud had said, but the description was no longer apt, and the man who stepped forth beside Spud O'Malley in the uniform of an engineer of a tramp freighter looked like nothing else in the world but just that. "Come on now," ordered Spud harshly, as a figure in gray and gold appeared around the corner of the coffee shop. "You're plenty late, me fine lad. Now get in there and clean up that dirty motor and get her running. Try out every fan on the old boat, then we'll be off." "Your number CG41," he whispered, and Chet repeated the number as he followed the pilot through the gate. "Okay," said the guard at the gate, "and I'll bet he gives you hell and to spare." Chet slouched his shoulders to disguise his real height and followed where Spud O'Malley, with every indication of righteous anger, strode indignantly down the pavement, and at the far end of which was a battered and service-stained ship. Her hull of dirty red showed mottlings of brown. She was sadly in need of a painter's gun. She would groan and squeal, Chet knew, when the fans lifted her from the hold-down clutch, and she couldn't fly at over 20,000 without leaking her internal pressure through 1,000 cracks that made her porous as an old balloon. But to Chet's eye, the old relic of the years was a thing of sheer beauty and grace. O'Malley was leading through an open freight hatch. Chet followed, and at his beckoning hand slipped into a dingy cabin. "Lay low there," the pilot ordered, and still, as Chet observed, his speech showed how clearly the man was thinking, since the emergency still existed. "I've cleared some time ago, Mr. Bullard. We're ready to leave as soon as we get the dispatcher's okay." The minutes were long where Chet waited in the pilot's cabin. Each sound might mean a last-minute search of departing ships, but he tried to tell himself that the attention of the officers would be centered upon the passenger liners. Beyond, where he could see out into the control room, a white light flashed. He heard the bellowing orders of the Irishman at the controls, and as other sounds reached his ears, he had to grip his hands hard while he fought for control of the laughter that was almost hysterical. For beneath him he felt the sluggish lift of the ship, and from every joint and plate of this old timer of the air came squawking protests against the cruel fates that drove her forth again to face the buffeting, racking gales. But the blue light of an ascending area was about them, and Spud O'Malley was shouting from the control room: "Sure, and we're off, Mr. Bullard. Now do you come up here and tell me all about it, but I warn you, I'll not be believing a word." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Up from Earth. Chet had plenty of time in which to acquaint Pilot O'Malley with the facts, and when he had told his story, it did his sick and worried mind good to hear the explosive stream of expletives that came from the other's lips. Yet, despite the Irishman's anger, it was noticeable that he closed the tight door of the control room before he said a word. "Only a skeleton crew," he explained. "Just the relief pilot and the engineers and a man or two in the galley, and I trust 'em all. But you can't be too careful. The commander," he concluded, "is getting to be more an emperor than a commander, and something's got to be done. Discipline we must have, 'tis true, but this kowtowing to his Royal Highness and all of that, devil a bit do I like it. If only you could show him up, Mr. Bullard, but of course you can't." "I'm not so sure," Chet responded. "What I told the big boss wasn't all bluff. Haldgren did go out 5 years ago this month. We have the record of a crescent liner's captain who saw Haldgren's little ship shoot through the R.A. and go out as if it were going somewhere. And now we have these flashes. Do you see what that means, Spud? An SOS. Nobody but an Earthman would send that, and we wouldn't do it now. We would just press the lever of our emergency call, and every receiver within 1,000 miles would pick up the scream of it. But we've had this Dunstan emergency transmitter less than 4 years. Haldgren knew only the old SOS. And remember this: 3 dots, 3 dashes, and 3 dots just don't happen. They showed up on the moon. They were repeated the next night. Somebody sent them. Who was it? And Pilot O'Malley gave the only obvious answer. There's only yourself and Mr. Harkness and Pilot Haldgren that could have got there. 'Twas Haldgren, of course. What a pity that you can't go. 'Tis likely the poor boy needs help. 5 years, mused Chet. 5 long years since he left. He must have landed safely, and then what? After 5 years comes a signal, and that signal a call for help that no pilot worthy the name would disregard. "Where are we bound?" he demanded abruptly. "Russia," said O'Malley. "I disremember the name. 'Tis on my orders, but I know it's a long way up north." "Spud," said Chet, "you're a rotten pilot. You're one of the worst I ever knew. Careless, that's your worst fault, and if anybody doubts that, they'll believe it after this trip. For, Spud, if you're any friend of mine, and I know you are, you're going to lose your bearings and kick this old Skyhog a long way beyond that factory she is bound for. And you're going to set me down in a godforsaken spot in the Arctic where I'm pretty sure I'll find a ship waiting for me. And if you just stick around for a while after that, you will see me take off for the moon. Then, if Haldgren is there..." Chet failed to finish the sentence. He was staring through a rear lookout where, over the arc of the Earth's horizon, could be seen a thin crescent moon. About it, drifting clouds made a halo. The eyes of Spud O'Malley followed Chet's, and his imaginative faculties must have been stimulated by Chet's words, for he gazed open-mouthed as if for the first time he visioned that golden scimitar as something more substantial than a high-hung light. He drew one long, incredulous breath before he answered. "What position, sir? Say the word and I'll lose myself so bad we'll be over the pole and halfway to the equator again." "Not that bad," was Chet's assurance. "Just spot this ship over 8214 north and 9320 east, and I'll give you local bearings from there." Then to himself, "Cold storage," Walt said. He meant our old shop, of course. Probably had a hunch we would need it. But to the pilot he said only the one word, "Thanks," though the grip of his hand must have spoken more eloquently. The eastbound lanes of the 5,000 level saw them plod slowly along, while faster and better groomed ships slipped smoothly past. Then the red hull rose to level 12 and swung out upon the great circle course that would bear them more directly in the direction of the destination Chet had given. There were free levels higher up in which they could have laid a direct course, but the Irish pilot did not need Chet to tell him that the old hull would never stand it. Her internal pressure could never have been maintained at any density such as human lungs demanded. But they were on their way, and Chet's customary genial expression gave place to one of more grim determination as he watched the white-flecked ocean drift slowly past below. Once a patrol ship spoke to them. Daylight had come to show plainly the silver hull with its distinctive red markings of the service that slipped smoothly down from above to hang poised under flashing fans like a giant hummingbird. Her directed radio beam flashed the yellow call signal in O'Malley's control room. Chet was beside him, and the two exchanged silent glances before O'Malley cut in his transmitter. He must give name and number. This signal was a demand that could not be disregarded. But on the old freighter was no automatic sender that would flash the information across to the other ship. The pilot's voice must serve instead. Number 37G42, he thundered into the radio phone. Freighter of the Intercolonial Line, without cargo. For the love of Pete, shouted the loudspeaker beside him in volume to drown out the pilot's words. Are you sending this by short wave, or are you just yelling across to me? Calm down, you Irish terrier. Then, before the pilot could reply, the voice from the silver and red patrol ship dropped into an exaggerated mimicry of the O'Malley brogue. And did you say 'twas a freighter you had there? Sure, I thought at the very last 'twas a fine big liner from the Orient and Transpolar run, dropped down here from the high levels. All right, Spud, on your way, but don't crowd the bottom of the 12 level so close. This is O16L. Jimmy Maddox. Bye-bye. I'll report you okay. Again Chet looked at the pilot silently before he glanced back at the vanishing ship, already small in the distance. He repeated the patrol captain's words. You will report us okay. Yes, Jimmy, you'll do that. And if they want to find us again, you can tell them right where to look. I'm pushing her all I can, Mr. Bullard, said Spud. 'Tis all she can do. And now, do you go into my cabin. There's 2 berths there, and we'll just turn in and sleep while my relief man takes his turn. But go in before I call him. There's not a soul on the ship besides ourselves knows that you are here. And in the cabin, a short time later, Pilot O'Malley chuckled as he whispered, I gave the lad his course, and Mac will follow it. But it'll never take him near to the part of Russia he expects it to. Still, the record's clear as far as he's concerned. I've got it in the log. Mac's a good lad, and I wouldn't have him get into trouble over this. In the freighter's cabin, the chronometer was again approaching the hour of 22. For nearly 24 hours the ship had been on her plodding way, and lacking the ADD, the automatic destination detector, and other refinements of instrumental installations of the passenger ships, Pilot O'Malley had to work out his position for himself. And where a faster craft would have driven through with scarcely a quiver, the big ship trembled with the buffets and suction of wintry blasts that drove dry snow like sand across the lookout glasses. The 12,000 level was an unbroken cloud of snow, a gray smother where the red ship's blunt and rusty bow nosed through. O'Malley clung to the chart table as the air gave way beneath them and the ship fell 100 feet or more before her racing fans took hold and jerked her back to an even keel. He managed to check his figures, then moved to the door of his cabin, opened it, and called softly. Chet was beside him in an instant. It had seemed best that he remain in hiding, and he knew what the pilot's call meant. Made it, did you? He exclaimed. Now I'll take a look about and pick up my bearing points. But one look at the ports and he shook his head. That's dirty, he told O'Malley, and his eyes twinkled as he felt the old ship rear and plunge with the lift of a driving gale. And how the old girl does feel it. She can't rip through and she can't go above. You've had some trips, Bud. It's been mighty decent of you to go to all this. A flashing of yellow light on the instrument panel brought his thanks to a sudden halt. A voice, startling in its sudden loudness, filled the little room. Calling 37G42. Stand by for orders. Patrol O16L sending. Acknowledge, please." Chet's eyes were staring into those of O'Malley. "That's Jimmy Maddox back on our trail," he said. "Now, what has got them suspicious?" He glanced once more at the collision instrument. "He's right overhead at 30,000," he added. "And there are more of them coming in from all sides. Now, what the devil—" Spud O'Malley had his hand on the voice switch. "Be quiet," he commanded, then spoke into the transmitter. 37G42 acknowledging," he said, and again Chet observed how all trace of accent had departed from his voice. It was an indication of the moment's tenseness and of the pilot's full understanding of their position. The answering order was crisply spoken. This was a different Jimmy Maddox from the one who had chaffed the Irish pilot some hours before. "Stand by, we're coming down. Records at Hoover Terminal show 2 men reporting at pilot's gate under the number of your engineer, CG41. Hold your ship exactly where you are. We're sending a man aboard." Chet had moved silently to the controls. The old multiple lever instrument, he knew it well. But he looked at Spud O'Malley and waited for his nod of assent before he presumed to trespass on another pilot's domain. Then he shifted 2 little levers, and the ship fell away beneath them as it plunged toward the earth. And Pilot O'Malley was explaining to the patrol ship captain as best he could for the rolling plunge of his careening ship. "I can't hold her, sir, and you'd best be keeping away. It's storming fearful down here, and I can't rise above it. Keep clear, I'm warning you." The hum of their helicopters rose to a shrill whine as Chet drove the ship out and down through the smothering clouds. "You must hear her fans on your instruments. You can see how we're pitching." He switched off the transmitter for a moment and faced Chet. "They've been checking close," he stated. "That was my engineer's number I gave you as we came through the gate, and of course he had given it before when he reported in. Now we're up against it." The collision instrument was humming with the sound of many motors, and warning lights were giving their silent alarm of the oncoming ships. "They're coming in," Spud went on hopelessly, "like a flock of kites in the tropics when one of them's found something dead, and it's us that's the carcass." But Chet was not listening. The snowy clouds had broken for an instant. Their ship had driven through and beneath them. Through the wild, whirling chaos of white there came for an instant a rift, and far across the icy expanse Chet glimpsed a range of black hills. He spoke sharply to the pilot. "That's Jimmy Maddox above us. Kid him along, Spud. Tell him we're coming up. Don't let him grab us with his magnets. This is putting you in a devil of a hole, old man. I'm sorry, but we've got to see it through now. You can never set this ship down, Spud. That patrol would be on our backs in half a second, and they'd knock me out with one shot the minute I stepped outside." The clear space in the storm had filled again with the dirty, gray wind-whipped snow. Off at the right, a dim glow of distant fires, was the midnight sun as it shone for a brief moment. One blast, more malignant in its fury than those that had come before, tore first at the blunt bow, then caught them amidships to roll the big, sluggish freighter till her racked framework shrieked and chattered. Spud pointed through a rear lookout where a silvery patrol ship flashed down through the clouds. "There's Jimmy," he shouted. "He's taking no chances of our landing. He's right on our tail." But Chet Bullard, his hands working at the control levers, was staring straight ahead into that gray blast, and his eyes were shining as he pulled back on a lever that threw them once more into the concealment of the whirling clouds above. "Spud," he was shouting, "have you got a chute? You freighters have 'em sometimes. Get me a chute, and I'll fool them yet. I saw the shed, our hangars, our workshop. There's where our ship is." They were lost once more in the snow that seemed to be driving past in solid drifts. Chet heard Spud shouting down a voice tube, and curiously, it was plain that the Irish pilot had lost all tenseness from his voice. He was happy and as carefree as if he had found the answer to all his perplexing questions. He was calling an order for his relief pilot. "Mac, do you break out 2 parachutes, me lad? Bring 'em up here and shake a leg. No, there's nothing to worry about. Devil a thing." Then into the transmitter he shouted thickly as he switched the instrument on. "Jimmy, me boy, keep away, I'm telling you, or you'll have me Irish temper disturbed, and I'm a devil when I'm roused. What do I know about your twin engineers? One of them makes trouble enough for me. Now take yourself away, and don't step on the tail of this ship, or we'll go down to glory together. Unless we go to another terminal and find ourselves in hell, and all of us covered with snow. Think how devilish conspicuous you'd be feeling." A discord of voices silenced his laughing banter, and on the instrument board the warning light was flashing imperatively. Above the bedlam of voices one stood out, and all other commands were silent before the voice of authority. "Silence! This is the commander of air. Orders for O16L. Seize that ship. Your magnets. Disregard damage. Get your magnets on that ship and hold her. We are coming down." Chet reached for the transmitter switch and opened it that their voices might not go beyond the control room. "Lots of company. They seem pretty certain that they're on the right track, and the big boss himself is coming down to call. Can't you hurry those chutes?" The control room door was flung open as the figure of a young man stumbled through and dropped 2 bundles of cloth and webbing upon the floor. He clung to the door frame as Chet threw the big freighter into a totally unexpected maneuver that rolled them down and away from a silver-bellied ship above. Then the levers moved again, and the ship went hard aport as Chet caught again one fleeting glimpse of a shadow below that could only be the markings of a building he had known well. "Hold her there, Spud," he shouted. "He'll be back in a minute or two. He'll get us next time." Chet was reaching for the straps of a chute. He had the webbing about him when he stopped to waste precious seconds in wide-eyed staring at the figure of Spud O'Malley. Spud was pulling at a recalcitrant buckle. He had motioned the relief pilot to take the controls, and now the bulk of a parachute pack hung awkwardly behind him. "Spud," Chet shouted, "you're not stepping out too. It's no sure thing with these old chutes. They're probably rotten. Stay here. Tell 'em I stuck you up with a gun. Tell 'em I made you bring me." "If you must talk," said Spud O'Malley calmly, and pulled a strap tight across his chest, "do you be trying to work while you talk. Get that harness on. If I let you stow away on my ship, you can do no less than take me along on yours." A crashing impact drove the men to the floor in a sprawling heap. Chet pulled the last strap tight as he lay there. The lookouts were black above where the belly of the patrol ship clung close. "Jimmy knows how to obey orders," said Chet as he came to his feet. "No cable magnets for Jimmy. He just smashed down on top of us, ripped off our fans, and grabbed hold." He was helping Spud to his feet as he spoke. "Mac, me boy," the pilot told his assistant, "the log has it all, the whole story. There'll be no trouble for you at all." He yanked quickly at the port opening switch, and the big steel disk backed slowly out of its threaded seat and swung wide. Chet drew back one involuntary step as a blast of icy wind drove stinging snow into his face. Then, without a word, he gave Spud O'Malley a joyous grin and threw himself out into the void. And later, as he released the chute, where a wind was dragging him violently across an icy expanse, he was laughing exultantly to see another chute whirled into the enshrouding drifts, while the chunky figure of a man came scrambling to his feet that he might shake a fist into the air toward some hidden enemy and shout into the storm epithets only half heard. "And be damned to ye," Chet heard him conclude, then was close enough to throw one arm about the figure and draw him after where he made his way toward a building that was like a mountain of snow. Spud must have marveled at the craft within, at her sleek, shining sides, the flat nose that ended in a black exhaust port. He was examining the other exhausts that ringed her round when Chet pulled out a lever from the streamlined surface and swung open an entrance port. He motioned Spud into the brilliantly lighted interior, where nitron illuminators were almost blinding as they shone on gleaming levers and dials of a control room like none that Spud O'Malley had ever seen. Chet had thrown the building's doors open wide. A whirling motor had drawn them back on hidden tracks. Now he closed the entrance port with care. Then he glanced at his instruments before he placed his hand on a metal ball. It hung suspended in air within a cage of curved bars. It was a modification of the Highliner ball control, and it was new. Walt Harkness had had it installed to replace a more crudely fashioned substitute that had brought them safely back from the Dark Moon. The name of that new satellite was on Chet's lips as his thin hand rested delicately upon the ball. "It's not the Dark Moon this time, old girl," he told the ship, "though you've taken me there twice. But we're going up just the same, and I told the commander he hasn't patrol ships enough to hold us back." His fingers were gripping the little ball, lifting it, moving it forward. And as he lifted, the ship itself, the silent cylinder, came roaring into life. Within the great building was a thundering blast that made the voice of the storm less than a whispering breath. It came but faintly through the heavily insulated walls, but Chet felt the lift of the ship, and that joyous smile was crinkling about his eyes as the silvery cylinder floated smoothly out of her shelter into the grip of the wind. His eyes were on an upper lookout, where clouds were driving away like a curtain unrolled. More cloud banks were coming, but for a time the heavens were clear, where the great red hull of a rusty freighter hung helpless beneath a red and silver patrol ship whose magnets held fast to its prey. There were other shapes in the markings of the service that shot slantingly down. Chet thought again of the carrion birds. Then he saw the gold star on the bow of a great cruiser, and knew from that ship that the commander must be seeing their own below. He eased gently forward on a tiny ball, forward and forward, while the compensating floor of the control room swung up behind them and seemed thrusting up with unbearable weight. There were flashes from the cruiser above, and flashes of red on the ice behind, with fountains of shattered ice and rock. Detonite works its most terrible destruction on a surface that is brittle and hard. But of what avail are detonite shells against a craft whose speed builds up to something greater than the muzzle velocity of a shell, a silvery craft that sweeps out and out toward a black mountain range, then swings slowly up in a curve of sheer beauty that bends into banked masses of clouds and ends. But within the control room, Chet Bullard, no longer master pilot of the world, but master in all truth of space, knew that his ship's flight was far from ending. He turned to grin happily at his companion. "We're off," he shouted, "and it's thanks to you that we made it. If Haldgren's alive, he'll have you to thank, for it's you that has done the trick so far." But Spud O'Malley answered soberly as he stared up and out into the blackness of levels he had never seen. "I've helped," he admitted. "I've helped a bit, but it's a devil of a job for navigating that's ahead. And that's up to you, Chet Bullard. 'Tis no job for an old Omahan like myself." Chet felt the lift of the repelling area as they shot through. Ahead was the black velvet night that he knew so well. Its silent emptiness was pricked through with bright points of fire. "I found the dark moon," he said slowly, "and that you can't see at all. This other will be easy." There was no boastfulness in the tone, and Spud O'Malley nodded as he glanced respectfully at the young man who threw back his disheveled mop of hair from a lean face and marked down some cryptic figures on a record sheet. Chet Bullard was on the job, and his passenger, it would seem, was satisfied that his unbelievable adventure was well begun. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Life monstrous and horrible. "It looks," said Spud O'Malley, "as if some bad little spalpeen of the skies had thrown pebbles at it when it was soft. It's fair pockmarked with places where the stones have hit." He was staring through a forward lookout, where the whole sky seemed filled with a tremendous disk. One quarter was brilliantly alight. It formed the fat crescent within whose arms the rest of the globe was held in fainter glowing. By comparison, this greater portion was dark, though illuminated by earthlight far brighter than any moonlight on earth. But light or dark, the surface showed nothing but an appalling desolation where the rocky expanse had been still further torn and disrupted, pockmarked, as O'Malley had said, with great rings that had been the walls of tremendous volcanoes. Chet was consulting a map where a similar area of circular markings had been named by scientists of an earlier day. "Hercules," he mused, and stared out at the great circle of the moon. "The crater of Hercules. Yes, that must be it. The dark area off to one side is the Lake of Dreams. Below it is the Lake of Death. Atlas, Hercules, suffering cats, what volcanoes they must have been." "I don't like your names," objected O'Malley. "Lake of Death? That's not so good. And I don't see any lake, and the whole moon is wrong side up, according to your map." Chet reached for the ball control and moved it, and swung their ship in a slow rotary motion. The result was an apparent revolution of the moon. "There, it's right side up," Chet laughed. "That is, if you can tell me what direction is up out here in space. And as for the names, don't let them disturb you. They don't mean anything. Some old timer with a little 3-inch telescope probably named them. The darker areas look like seas to them. Astronomers have known better for a long time, and you and we're darn sure of it now." The great sea of shadow, a darker area within the shaded portion whose only light came from the earth, was plainly a vast expanse of blackened rock, an immense depression like the bottom of some earlier sea. It was heaved into corrugations that Chet knew would be mountain high at close range. Marked with the orifices of what once had been volcanoes, the floor of the Lake of Death was hundreds of miles in extent. But as for seas and lakes, there was no sign of water in the whole vast, desolate globe. An unlikely place, Chet admitted, for the beginning of their search, and yet those flashes of light, the SOS, they had been real. The bow blast had been roaring for over an hour. Their strong deceleration made the forward part of the ship seem down. And down it was, too. by reason of the pull of the great globe they were approaching. But the roaring exhaust up ahead was checking their speed. Chet measured and timed the apparent growth of the moon disk, and nodded his satisfaction at their reduced speed. "This will stop us," he said. "I didn't know but we would have to swing off, shoot past, and return under control. But we're all right, and there is the place we're looking for. The big ring of Hercules, the level floor of rock inside it, and over at one side the smaller crater." He was gazing entranced at the mammoth circle that had been a volcano's throat, the very one he had seen flashed on the screen. He moved the control to open a side exhaust and change their direction of fall. He was still staring, with emotions too overwhelming for words, and Spud O'Malley was silent beside him, as the great ring spread out and became an upthrust circle of torn, jagged mountains some 30 or more miles across and directly below. They fell softly into that circle. Its mountainous sides were high. They blocked off the view of the enormous terraces beyond that had been the crater's sloping sides. From the direction that had suddenly become east, the rising sun's strong light struck in a slant to make the bar rocks seem incandescent. On one side, the giant rim of the encircling mountains was black with shadow. The shadow reached out across the vast rocky floor almost to the foot of the opposite wall, many miles away. It enveloped their falling ship like a cushioning, ethereal sea, velvety, softly black, almost palpable. It was wrapping about them in the darkness of night as Chet's slender hand touched so delicately upon the ball control, checked them, eased off, drew back again until the thundering exhausts echoed softly where their ship hung suspended 100 feet above a rocky floor. The shrouding darkness erased the harsh contours of mountain and plain. It seemed shielding this place of desolation and horror from critical, perhaps unfriendly eyes of these beings from another world. And Chet laid their ship down gently and silently on the earth-lit plain, as if he, too, felt this sense of intrusion, as if there might be those who would resent the trespass of unwanted guests. But Spud O'Malley must have experienced no such delicacy of feeling. He let go one long pent-up breath. "And may the saints protect us," he said. "The lake of death outside, and inside here is purgatory itself, or I don't know my geography. But you made it, Chet, me boy, you made it. What a sweet little pilot you are." "There's air here," Chet was telling his companion later. "Air of a sort, but it's no good to us." He pointed to the spectro analyzer with its grouping of lines and light bands. "Carbon dioxide," he explained, "and some nitrogen, but mighty little of either. See the pressure gauge? It's way down. But that won't bother us too much. We've got some suits stowed away in the supplies that will hold an atmosphere of pressure, and their oxygen tanks will do the rest. We were ready for anything we might find on our Dark Moon trip, but we didn't need them there. Now they'll come in handy." "That's all right," O'Malley assured him. "I've gone down underwater in a diving suit. I've gone outside a ship for emergency repairs in a suit like yours when the air was as thin as this. I can stand it either way. But what I want to know is this: what the devil chance is there of finding your man Haldgren in such a frozen corner of purgatory as this? How could he live here? Here you've come in a fine big ship, and his was a little bit of a bullet by comparison. Yet I doubt if you could live here for 5 years with all your big oxygen supply. Now, how could he have done it with his little outfit? And what has he eaten? Does this look like a likely place for shooting rabbits, I ask you? Can a man catch a mess of fish in that empty lake of death? Or did Haldgren bring a sandwich with him? It may be." Chet Bullard shook his head doubtfully. "Don't get sarcastic," he grinned. "You can't think of any wilder questions than I have asked myself. He couldn't have lived here, Spud. That's the only answer. It just isn't humanly possible. All I know is that he did. I can't tell you how I know it, but I do. Those lights were a human call for help. No living man but Haldgren could have flashed them. He's alive, or was then. That's all I know." Spud crossed the control room, as he had done a score of times, to look through a glass port at the world outside. Chet, too, turned to the lookout by which he stood and stared through it. The men had found themselves surprisingly light within the ship. They had been compelled to guard against sudden motion. A step, instead of carrying them one stride, might hurl them the length of the room. This lowered gravitational pull helped to explain to the pilot that outer world. There, close by, was the rocky plain on which he had landed the ship. Smooth and shiny as obsidian in places, again it was spongy gray, the color of volcanic rock, bubbling with imprisoned gases at the instant of hardening. It stretched out and down, that gently rolling plain, for 1,000 yards or more, then ended in a welter of nightmare forms done in stone. It was like the work of some demented sculptor's tortured brain. Jutting tongues of rock stood in air for 100, 200 feet. Chet hardly dared estimate size in this place where all was so strange and unearthly. The hot rock had spouted high in the thin air, and it had frozen as it threw itself frantically out from the inferno of heat that had given it birth. The jets sprayed out like spume-topped waves. They were whipped into ribbons that the winds of this world could not tear down, and the ribbons shone, waving white in the earthlight. The tortured stone was torn and ripped into twisted contortions whose very writhing told of the hell this had been. Its grotesque horror struck through to the deeper levels of Chet's mind with a feeling he could not have depicted in words. From the higher elevation where the ship lay, he could look out and across this welter of storm-lashed rock to see it level off, then vanish where another crater mouth yawned black. Here was the inner crater. It had seemed small before. It was huge now, a place of mystery, a black, waiting throat into which Chet knew he must go, a place of indefinable terror. But it was a place, too, whence strange flashes had come, flashes that had told of the distress and suffering of men since the time when wireless waves had been widely used. The old call, the SOS, it had come from that throat. It had seemed a call sent directly to him, and Chet Bullard's eyes held steadily toward that place of mystery and of a sender unknown. "I'm going down," he told himself more than O'Malley. "There's something about it I can't understand. Something pretty damnable about it, I admit. But whatever it is, that's what I am here to find out." "'Tis a devil of a place to die," said O'Malley, "and not one I'd pick out at all. But it may be we won't have to. I'm going along, of course." The master pilot was reaching for the flexible metal suit he had brought from the storeroom. It was airtight, gas-proof. It would hold an internal pressure far beyond anything the wearer would demand, and its headpiece was flexible like the body of the suit, and would fit him closely. He drew the suit up over the clothes he wore, and closed the front with one pull of a metal tab. Within, soft rubber-faced cushions had interlocked. The body would fasten to the headpiece in the same way. But Chet paused with the headpiece in his hand. He looked at the glass window that would be before his eyes, at the thin diaphragms that would come over his ears and that would admit all ordinary sounds. And he tried out the microphone attachment that he could switch on to bring to his ears the faintest whisper from outside. All this he examined with care, while he seemed to be thinking deeply. Then he straightened and looked at his companion. "No, Spud, you're not going," he said. "This is my job. You stay with the ship. You and I make a rather small army. We don't know yet what we may be up against, and we mustn't risk all our forces in one advance. I'll see what there is, and, in case anything happens, you can take the ship back. I've taught you enough on the way over. I had this very thing in mind." He slipped the helmet over his blond head before O'Malley could reply. The earpieces and the microphone allowed him to hear. Another diaphragm in the center of the metal across his chest took his own voice and shouted it into the room. "Sure, I know you want to go, Spud, but you'll have to stay in reserve. Now show me how well you can fly this ship. Lift her off, then drift over that crater, and we'll have a look-see." Spud O'Malley's face was glum as he obeyed. Spud had seen nothing but death in this place of horror. Chet had observed that plainly. Yet it was equally plain that the Irish pilot was finding the order to live in safety a bitter dose. But Spud knew how to take orders. He lifted the little ball gently and swung the ship out toward the blackness of that deeper pit. Chet was watching the changing terrain. He saw the place of solid spouted rock end, saw it flatten out to an undulating surface that had rolled and heaved itself into many-colored shapes. Even in the earthlight, the kaleidoscopic colors were vivid in their changing reds and blues and yellow sheens. Then this surface sloped sharply away, though here it was rough with broken rock, where half-hardened lava, coughed from that throat, had fallen back and adhered to the molten sides. This rock in the inner crater was gray, pale and ghostly in the earthlight. It went down and still down, where Chet's eyes could not follow, down to an utter blackness. Chet was staring speculatively at the waiting dark when the first flash came. Blindingly keen, a flash of white light, another and another. It blazed dazzlingly into their cabin in vivid dashes and dots. The same signal as before was being repeated. 100 yards away was a little shelf of rock. Chet jerked at O'Malley's shoulder with his metal-cased hand and pointed. "Set her down," he ordered. "Let me out there. We can't put the ship down where those lights are. The throat is too narrow. There may be air currents that would smash us on a sharp rock. I'll go down. You wait. I'll be back." He was opening the inner door of the entrance port. Another closure in the outer shell made an airlock. He took time for one grip at the hand of Spud O'Malley, one grin of excited, adventurous joy that wrinkled about his eyes behind the window of his helmet. Then he picked up a detonite pistol, examined again its charge of tiny shells, jammed it firmly into the holster at his waist, and swung the big door shut behind him. And Pilot O'Malley watched him go with a premonition that he dared not speak. He heard the closing of the outer door, saw the tall, slender figure in a metal suit like a knight of old as Chet waved once, settled the oxygen tank across his shoulders, and picked his way carefully over a waste of shattered stone that led down and down into the dark. Then the Irishman looked once at the suit he had expected to wear, stared back where the figure of Chet had vanished, then dropped his head upon his hands while his homely face was twisted convulsively. It had come so soon. The great adventure was upon them before he had realized. The reconnaissance, the flashes, and then Chet had gone. And now he was alone in a silent ship that rested quietly in this soundless world. The silence was heavy upon him. It seemed pressing in with actual weight to bear him down. It was shattered at the last by the faintest of whispered echoes from without. Spud was on his feet in an instant. his eyes straining at one lookout after another, each giving him a view of only the desolation he knew and hated. What could it have been? He demanded. He found and rejected a dozen answers before he saw, far down in the black crater mouth, a flash of red, then heard again that ghost of a sound and knew it for what it was. Thick walls, these of the spaceship, and insulated well, and the thin atmosphere of this wild world could cut a blast of sound to a mere fraction of its volume. But the walls were emitting a fragmental echo of what must have been a reverberating voice. They were quivering to the roar of exploding detonite. It was Chet. He was fighting. He was in trouble. Spud's trembling hands steadied upon the metal control. He lifted the ship as smoothly as even Chet might have done, and he drove it out and down into a throat too narrow for safety, but where the tiny red flash of a weapon had called with an SOS as plain as any lettered call, a message to which brave men have everywhere responded. He saw Chet but once. The master pilot had shown him the flare release lever. He moved it now, and the place of darkness was suddenly blinding with light. There were rocks close at hand. The crater had narrowed to a funnel throat that was cut and terraced as if by human hands. Below, it ended in a smooth stone floor where the lava had sealed it shut. From a terrace came the gleaming reflection of Chet's suit. Miraculously, the gleam was doubled, as if another in similar garb stood at his side, and beyond, from blocks of stone, came leaping things, living creatures. The light died. Spud realized he had not opened the release lever full. He fumbled for it, found it, jammed it over, and in the light that followed, he saw only empty, terraced walls where nothing moved, and a lava floor below that, for an instant, gapped open, then again was smooth and firm. And the thunder of his ship's exhausts came back to him from those threatening walls to tell of a loneliness more certain and terrible than any solitude he had found in the silence where he had waited above. But through all his dismay ran an undercurrent of puzzled wonderment. For here on a dead world, where all men agreed there could be no life, he had seen the impossible. Only one glimpse before the light had died. Only for an instant had he seen the things that leaped upon Chet, but he knew. Never again could any man tell Spud O'Malley that the moon was a lifeless globe, and he knew that the life was of a form monstrous and horrible and malign. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. And I've brought you to this. The master pilot, when he stepped forth upon that weird globe, which was the moon, found himself plunged into a spectral world. Even from within the airtight suit, through whose helmet glass he peered, he sensed, as he had not when inside the ship, the vast desolation, the frozen emptiness of this rocky waste. His suit of woven metal was lined throughout with heavy fabric of insuline fibers, that strange product brought from the jungle heat of the upper Amazon to keep out the bitter cold of this frozen world. His ship was felted with the same material between its double walls. Without it, there would have been no resisting the cold of these interstellar reaches. But despite the padding within his suit, he felt the numbing cold of this dead world strike through, and the bleak and frigid barrenness that met his gaze was so implacably hostile to any living thing as to bring a shudder of more than physical cold. No warming sun as yet reflected from the rocks. About him was the blackness of a fire-formed lithosphere, whose lighter veining and occasional ashy fields were made ghostly in the earthlight. One slow, all-seeing glance at this, one moment of wondering amazement when he tilted his head far back that he might look up to the mouth of the crater and see, in a dead black sky, the great crescent of Earth, a vast incredible moon peeping over the serrated edge. Then, as if the interval of time since leaving the ship had been measured in hours instead of brief seconds, he remembered the flashing light that had signaled from below. His first step carried him, slipping and sprawling awkwardly, across a rocky slope white with the rime of carbon dioxide frost. He came to his feet and turned once to wave toward the ship where he knew Spud O'Malley must be watching from a lookout. Then, moving cautiously to learn the gauge of his own strength in this world of diminished weights, he started down. Rough going, Chet found. The wall of this great throat had not hardened without showing signs of its tortured coughing. But Chet learned to judge distance, and he found that a 50-foot chasm was a trifle to be crossed in one leap. Huge boulders, whose molten sides had frozen as they ran and dripped, could be surmounted by the spring of his leg muscles that could throw him incredibly through the air. And always he went downward toward the place where the lights had flashed. They came once more. He had descended 1,000 feet, he was estimating, when the black igneous rocks blazed blindingly with a reflected light like that of 1,000 suns. Another 100 feet below, down a precipitous slope, was a broad table of rock. He saw it in the instant before he threw one metal-clad arm across the eyepiece of his helmet to shut out the glare. And he saw, in that fraction of a second, a moving figure, another like himself, clad in an armored suit whose curves and fine-woven mesh caught the light in a million of sparkling flames. It was Haldgren, he told himself, and there was something that came chokingly into his throat at the thought. That lonely figure, one tiny dot of life on a bleak and lifeless stage. It was pitiful, this undying effort to signal, to let his own world know that he still lived. Chet did not put it into coherent words, but there was an overwhelming emotion that was part pity and part pride. He was suddenly glad and thankful to belong to a race of men who could carry on like this, who never said die. And, as the glare winked out, he threw himself recklessly down that last slope and brought up in a huddle at the feet of the one who had started back in affright. There was one metal-cased hand that went in a helpless gesture to the throat. The figure, all silvery white in the dim earth glow, staggered back against a wall of rock. Only by inches did it miss a fall from the precipice edge where the rock platform ended. From the floor, where his fall had flung him in awkward posture, Chet saw this, saw it, and marveled vaguely. What picture had he formed of Haldgren? What had he expected of him? He could not have told. Certainly, it was not this slenderly youthful figure, nor this reaction that was more of fright than startled amazement. And the voice, surely he had heard an involuntary, half-stifled scream. He came slowly to his feet, and he was wondering now if his deductions had been wrong. He had been sure that the sender of those messages was an Earthman. He had been so certain of finding Haldgren. Slowly he crossed the table of rock toward the waiting figure. Gently he extended his hands, palm upward, in a gesture of peaceful promise. Whoever, whatever this was, this moon being who had signaled, and in doing so had happened upon the letters that had a definite meaning of Earth, Chet knew he must not frighten him. One outstretched hand touched the metal that cased an arm, moved upward to the headpiece, as close-fitting as his own. tilted it that the light of earth might shine within and show him what matter of being he had found. And Chet, who had seen strange creatures on that dark moon where he and Harkness had explored, was prepared, despite the suit so like his own, to see some weird being of this newer world. But for what the soft light of the distant earth disclosed, he was entirely unprepared. Eyes blue and lovely as an azure sea, but wide with terror and dismay. Eyes that showed plainly a consternation of unbelief that changed slowly as the blue eyes stared into Chet's gray ones, until they were suddenly misty with tears, and the figure sagged and would have dropped at his feet had he not caught it in his arms. He heard his own voice exclaiming in wonderment, "A girl! One of our own kind! Out here on the moon?" Another voice, sweetly tremulous, replied, "Oh, it's true, it's true! You have come! You read my call! Oh, I hardly dared hope." Then the thrilling ecstasy of happiness in the voice gave place to accents of dismay as some horror of fear swept in upon her. "And I've brought you to this. You will be lost. Quick, climb for your life. I will come after. Quick, quick!" There was an agony in the voice now, and the figure wrenched itself from Chet's arms to point one slender hand upward in frantic urging, while yet the head turned that the eyes might look backward as if some danger threatened from below. "I've got a ship," Chet assured her. "God knows who you are or how you got here, but it's all right now. We'll leave." He had regained his grip upon one of those slender hands and was preparing to swing her up to the top of an incredibly high rock. Her scream checked him and sent his one free hand to the detonite pistol at his waist. "Behind you!" she cried. "Look back! They have come out!" The crater pit behind and below them was black with the inky blackness of smooth, fire-formed rock. Its many facets were smooth and polished. They made mirrors, many of them, for the earthlight reflected from the crater mouth. They served to diffuse this dim light and throw it again upon the monstrous blackness that was swarming from below. Men, thought Chet in one instant of half comprehension. Then, as he saw the chalk-white bodies, the dead and flabby whiteness of their faces, from which red eyes stared, he revised his estimate. Here was nothing human. The pistol was in his hand, but as yet he had not fired. Only the terror in the girl's voice had told him that these were enemies. He waited for a closer view, or for some direct attack, and needed to wait but a moment. Only an instant after he had seen the chalk-white bodies clustered below were in motion. They came leaping up the smooth expanse of rock, and they were obscured at times as if by black curtains that were drawn across their bodies. Then they would flash out again in dead white nakedness. It was uncanny. Chet had a feeling that they were wrapping themselves in black invisibility. Only when a score of white things threw themselves out into space did he know the truth. Out and upward they sprang, to soar above Chet's head and land on the slope above. All escape was cut off now, but it was not this thought that held Chet motionless for that moment of horror. It was the glimpse he had had against the light of the crater mouth of beating, flailing wings that whipped the thin air above him, of curved claws, and of long, horrible tails that might have belonged to giant rats. And the demoniac cries that the thin air brought him were no more suggestive of devils unleashed than were the leathery wings and the fleshy tails of the beasts. Yet it was not this alone that stunned the mind of the master pilot, but the horrible incongruity and of this monstrous inhumanness, allied with the human form of their bodies. And throughout he observed, with a curious sense of detachment, the furious beating of the wings, almost useless in the thin air, and the expansion and contraction of sac-like membranes on each side of the necks which he took to be auxiliary lungs. It was the girl's action that brought Chet to his senses. She moved slowly across the smooth table of rock toward the 3 or 4 beasts who had gained its level. Her head was bowed in utter dejection. Chet sensed it as plainly as if she had spoken. She held out her hands helplessly toward the creatures, and in that instant Chet's pistol spoke. Tiny shells, those of a detonite pistol, and the grain of explosive in the tip of each bullet is microscopic. But no body, human or inhuman, be it made of flesh, can withstand the shattering concussion of that exploding shell. The beast beside that figure, slenderly girlish even in its metal sheath, fell into the pit beyond. Their screams rang horribly as they fell. There were others who took their places, and they, too, vanished under the smashing shots. And then, after timeless moments of waiting, while the only sound was the half-audible voice of the girl who sobbed, "Now you are surely lost. They will kill you. You should not have fired. I should never have brought you here." There came the familiar thunder of a ship's exhausts. Down from above, a black shadow came silently crashing. A blaze of light, terrific in its brilliance, brought an exclamation to Chet's lips and hope to his heart. "Spud, you old fool, you're coming to get us." But the words ended with an avalanche of bodies that threw themselves down the black slope. There were others coming from below, leaping from the stones. The ledge was filled with them. Chet was firing blindly as he felt himself borne down, felt long fingers that ripped, then closed about his throat and jammed the metal of his suit in chokingly. He heard the beating of giant wings about him, felt himself half carried and half thrown toward a floor of rock below. There was an opening that loomed blackly in that floor. One glimpse of his surroundings Chet had before the press of bodies closed him in. They were forcing the shining, silvery figure of a girl into that black opening, dropping her. Then he felt himself hurled into the same void, while above him a ship of space thundered vainly from her great exhausts, as if roaring in rage at her own futility. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Heart of the Moon. In the grasp of the winged creature's long clawed hands, Chet was helpless. He was struggling vainly when they released their hold, and he felt himself falling into a pit that, as far as he knew, was a bottomless abyss. He was still struggling to right himself in midair when he struck. To fall even so short a distance on Earth would have meant instant death. Here, where gravitation's pull was but 1/6 that of Earth, he still struck on a rocky floor with a thud that made him sick for lack of breath. Above him was a pale circle of light. Tipping the edge of a vast crater mouth high above was a rim of brilliance, Earthlight. Chet was suddenly certain that he was seeing the glow for the last time as the circle went black, and there came to him the unmistakable clang of metal where a door was shut. Through the countless mingled emotions that filled him, he was wondering what manner of creatures these were in whose hands he had fallen. Intelligent beyond a doubt, in their own way, and he could not question the evidence of his own eyes and ears. They were able to work in metals and to seal the mouth of this lunar tomb. But he was still alive. He could not give up now. This adventure, upon which he had launched with such high hopes, had turned out differently than expected, but he told himself it was not ended yet. And instead of a lifeless globe, he found this a place peopled with strange half-human life. And, more marvelous still, instead of Haldgren, whom he had come to seek, there had been a girl. Chet had recovered his ability to breathe, and he made sure that the oxygen tank was intact. And now he called softly into the blackness of this dark vault where he had seen her thrown. "Are you alive?" he asked. "Can you hear me?" For an answer came quick rustling of moving bodies, the smooth rasping of wings on leathery wings, hands that fumbled for him, then closed about arms and legs and throat, while in his ears was a chattering of high-pitched squeals. Again he was lifted in air, held there in the grip of a score of lean, long-fingered hands. He was nerving himself to undergo without flinching whatever new torture might be in store. Yet he thrilled inexplicably as through the sounds of these things about him he heard a muffled, "Yes, yes, oh, I'm glad." The sentence was unfinished. Before Chet's eyes a light was growing, a mere slit at first. It grew to a luminous circle in the rocky floor, and as it opened he felt the pressure of his metal suit upon his body, where before it had been slightly ballooned by the pressure of oxygen he had maintained. With the opening of this door to another subterranean chamber had come a renewed atmospheric pressure, and now, in the denser gas, he saw in ghastly silhouette against the lighted pit flying figures that floated and soared on outstretched wings of inky black. Beside him and above he heard the swishing flutter of other wings. He felt himself lifted from the floor. He was being floated out above the luminous pit by the flying things that held him. No direct glare came from below, but a soft violet radiance. It shone full upon him, past him, to light up and give detail to those faces that had been featureless before. Chet had just one moment of fascinated staring into the diabolical pasty faces where narrow red eyes stared back into his. Then the squealing voices were stilled. One, louder than the rest, rasped an order, and Chet felt the hands relax. Once more he was falling down, down, and still down, until he knew that his velocity of fall meant an impact he could never survive. And curiously, as he fell, his mind was entirely unconcerned with his own fate. For himself he had accepted death, but he saw for what seemed like hours a vision of a familiar control room and an Irish pilot who sat by the controls. He was looking sharply ahead. He was checking speed. He was landing softly, safely, on a familiar field of earth. That passed, and, following, came a feeling of regret, a deep hurt, and a rage at his own inability to be of help. Far above him, through the luminous air, he saw another body falling, and he knew that the girl, too, had been thrown to the same fate. Those eyes of blue had locked with his for but a few brief seconds. Who was she? What was she? He had no way of knowing. But in that instant of mental meeting there had passed a flash between the two that had burned deeply into Chet's real and hidden self. Chet himself, had he been in a laughing mood, might have smiled at the idea of affection being born in that brief time. Yet he might have asked instead how long was needed to bridge the sharp gap of a radio-powered transmitter. How much time was needed for anode and cathode each to recognize the other? Something of this was passing in confusion through his mind, while his more conscious faculties were tensing his body for the fatal impact he knew must come. Without thinking the thought in words, he knew that the luminous walls had receded. They were more distant now, Their glow came to him from far above, and as his falling body turned again and again in air, he saw that below him was nothing but a vast emptiness filled with luminous vapors that swirled and writhed. Then the last gleam of lighted walls faded. He was falling at terrific speed through a black tempest whose winds tore and screamed about him. It was his own falling speed that made these winds. There remained with him enough of reasoning power to realize this, and he waited and marveled that he could fall so tremendous a distance. First had been the great shaft down which he had plunged, then, as it widened, had come this greater void. The crater of Hercules must have opened into a vast shell or a cavern of incredible depth. The winged things of the moon knew of it. They had cast him to his death, him and the girl. Her slowly turning body was not far away. It was as if they two hung suspended in air, while frightful blasts of whatever gas filled this space whipped and shrieked past and wrapped them round with a terrific pressure. And then the tempest ceased. Slowly the blasts diminished. The pressure relaxed. Gradually the sense of falling passed away, and with this there came a glimpse of light. Again the walls glowed as they had before, but far off in the distance. Chet saw them grow luminous, while he seemed hung motionless in space. Then once more they drew away from him. Once more he knew he was falling away from that light, plunging again into the depths he had traversed. And now, despite the oxygen that came to him uninterruptedly, he found his head swimming. The limit of human endurance had been reached. Desperately he tried to bring his reason to bear upon this miracle that had happened. He had not struck. Instead of falling to his death, he had cushioned against something. He was falling again where, not far away, another metal-clad figure hung limply in air and fell as he fell. And with that knowledge, the whirling turmoil within his brain ended in a blood-red flashing that went finally to merciful darkness. The darkness still wrapped him thickly about when he regained consciousness, a darkness saved from utter black only by a faint luminosity that seemed to penetrate and be part of the air about him. Still hardly more than half conscious, lying, it seemed, on a soft bed where he was weightless, he stirred and flung out one arm. From his fingertips he saw whirls of violet light sweep out and away, as vortices might have been set in motion by a swimmer in a more liquid medium. Fascinated, failing utterly to comprehend where he was, he moved his hands deliberately, swept one arm from side to side, and a number of luminous whirlpools went spinning out into space. And then he remembered. He remembered the terrific fall that had miraculously brought him back to a place of light like that where his fall had begun. He remembered beginning the second fall, and while he still could not know what it meant, he knew that he must have been unconscious for hours, and with that his thoughts came back to the girl. For the first time he found leisure to give mental voice to his wonderment. The mystery of it all, of her presence here on the moon. Again he was overwhelmed with the wonder of his surprising discovery. It was nearly beyond belief. Almost he doubted the reality of what his own eyes had seen. But there was no doubting his own presence here in this strange place. The unreality of it, the strangeness of his own sensations, were borne in upon him. Where was he? He asked. What was this soft cushion upon which he rested so lightly? He tried to sit up, and found that he merely twisted his body and set other eddies of light into motion. Cautiously he swung one arm out as far as he could reach. There was nothing there. He moved the arm down, reached with his hand beneath him, and still there was nothing tangible. Through his mind swept a gripping fear, a wordless, incoherent terror of something he could not name. Desperately he wanted to touch something firm and solid, lay his hands upon something he knew was real. And he flung out his arms and legs in a paroxysm of futile effort. He seemed hung in nothingness, an utter emptiness where nothing moved, only the ghostly whirls of light that ran lazily away from his beating hands until they died silently away into darkness, swallowed up in this unspeakable horror of soundless space. And when he had quieted again, he knew with a dreadful certainty that there was nothing there. He was suspended in a great void, immersed in an ocean of some unknown gas. The sense of loneliness that filled him was devastating. He could have faced death as he had faced it before, unflinchingly. That was all in the day's work. But here was something that tested sanity itself. Could he but touch something substantial, he told himself, it would help him to keep a grip on reality. Even to see and feel one of the winged horrors would be in a way a relief. His struggles had ceased. All about him the atmosphere was quivering and writhing with whirling light that swirled and danced and mingled, one glowing vortex with another. Then it too died, and through the dark that was relieved only by the faint luminosity of the quiescent gas, he saw far off a point of light. Here was something to which he could pin his eyes, something outside of himself and the horror of nothingness in which he was immersed. He stared through the window of his helmet while the light grew and expanded into nebulous, cloudy glowing that faded and was gone. Again it came and died, and a third time. And then Chet Bullard swore loudly and harshly within the silence of his own mental sheath, while he cursed his own dullness that had kept him from instant comprehension. The light was far away, but "Keep moving," Chet called, hoping that his voice might span the void. "Keep moving so I can see your light. I'll try to swim over." He threw himself over with a convulsive jerk and flattened the palms of his hands into a breaststroke, while he kicked with his feet against the dense atmosphere about him. And he saw with delight that the whirling ripples of light moved back of him. He felt that he was making some headway, slight though it must be. He saw her at last and heard her call. "I'm swimming too," she cried. "How wonderful to see you! This loneliness, it's horrible, unbearable." "I understand," Chet said. "It is pretty bad." Then, at sound of a stifled sob, he gripped one reaching hand hard and tried to bring himself out from under the pall that numbed his own mind. He even attempted to force a note of lightness into his words. "I've flown everything with wings," he told her, "but this is the first time I ever flew myself. Guess I was never properly designed." Feeble, this attempt at humor, but there was none to note the strained edge in his tone. Only a girl whose metal-clad hand closed in a tight hold upon his. "You can joke now," she said with a catch in her voice that showed how desperately hard she was trying to meet Chet's fortitude and force her own words to steadiness. "That takes real nerve. I like that." Then she added, "But it's hopeless, you know that. They've got us, and now that some of them have been killed, they will, and the trace of Chet's strained smile that lingered on his lips, could she have seen it, would have appeared grim. "Whatever it was you didn't say, I agree with. I imagine the finish will not be pleasant." Once more he was facing the inevitable, and as before, he faced it squarely, knowingly, then put it completely from his mind. There was so much he must know before that adventure's end was reached. "Tell me," he demanded, "who are they? Where are they? How many are there of them? And where have they got us? What kind of place is this, where all natural laws are suspended, where gravitation is at zero? And for heaven's sakes, tell me who you are. Where are you from? How did you get here on the moon?" That uncontrollable catch in the girl's voice had taken on a trace of brave laughter that overlay the trembling sob in her throat. "That's a lot of information," she said, "and I'm afraid it will not make much difference if you know. Oh, I wish I had some atom of encouragement for you. I do not know who you are either, and you have been so brave. You have come here. I brought you with my signals for help, brought you to your death. For it is death. This is the end of our adventuring, mine and yours as well, here at the center, the exact center of the moon." "Ah," answered Chet Bullard softly, and understanding came to him. "I should have guessed it. The atmospheric pressure and density, and we fell past the center, then back again. We've been vibrating back and forth until we came to rest at last. And now we die. Well, it might have been worse." He was staring out through the little window of his helmet, staring into the faintly luminous atmosphere, facing the end of his brave fling with fortune. It was an instant before he realized that there was something moving in the void. He pressed softly upon the hand he held and pointed. "See," he said in a hushed tone, "there is something there." It took form slowly, a shapeless, round blur in the pale light. Inch by inch it drifted toward them, until Chet moved one hand abruptly and found he had created a ripple of light by which he could see more clearly, and he saw before him a bulging, membranous sac. It had been smoothly spherical before. It heaved itself into strange protuberances as he watched. He flipped his hand to set up another vortex of light, and he saw the first rip that formed in the membrane. Before his staring eyes the bag burst open, and Chet, who had wished for some substantial thing, even a denizen of this wild world, found his wish fulfilled. For the thin membrane tore in a score of places to release a body from within, a shapeless, huddled mass of chalk-white flesh in a wrapping of black leather that unfolded before his eyes and became wings which waved feebly in their first attempt at flight. The pallid body, supple as a giant worm, jerked spasmodically and turned sightless eyes toward the watching Earth folk. Then, as if drawn by some magnet invisible in the distance, the black wings began to beat the air, and the creature moved off in a straight line toward some unknown goal. Another of the membranous spheres drifted past in the light that came from those fluttering wings. A second showed in repulsive shininess. Chet was aware that there were many of the things about. "Eggs!" he exclaimed, with a disgust that partook of nausea. "And the damnable thing hatched right here before our eyes." And the girl gave the final explanation. "The moon is just a great shell. They lay their eggs, these half-human creatures that you saw, and attach them to the inner surface of that shell. Then at certain periods they come loose and float away. I never knew what became of them. Now I understand at last." "You know all this?" protested Chet. "How can you know it? How long have you been here?" "I have kept track of time for a while," said the voice beside him. "Then I forgot it when they took Frithjof away. But it must have been about 5 years. 5 years of terror and vain hopes and wild plans for escape. And now it ends, after 5 years." And Chet Bullard, within his metal helmet, was repeating in bewilderment. 5 years? Haldgren left 5 years ago. What does it mean? Nor did he pause to realize that through his amazement was woven a thread of another hue, tinged faintly with jealousy that demanded of him: "Frithjof, Who was Frithjof? Who was taken away? Chet's mind was filled with a confusion of questions that jostled one another to silence when he tried to give them expression. And there was little time for questioning. He saw other floating eggs, whose membranous coverings had turned leathery and opaque. And he saw the white phantom figures who gathered those eggs. One came near, till Chet could make out the repulsive face and black, staring eyes with their fiery red center. It was one of the things that had captured him. He saw it move swiftly on broad wings. It held a leathery egg in its curled clawed hands, while its long tail whipped around and laid the egg open with one slash of a sharp spiked point. One more of the young of this horrible species was liberated and went winging away into the dark, only the whirls of light in the atmosphere marking the beating of its wings. Chet's eyes followed to see it far out beyond the light that expanded as it drew near. The beaten atmospheric gas was whipped to cold flame where some 10 or a dozen phantom demons came swiftly on toward the waiting humans. They were swarming about in an instant. Chet had no time for even a shouted warning before he felt himself seized by their long bony claws. Then a net of rough fibered rope was flung about him, and he felt it draw tight as the winged beasts lifted him up and out into the void. Wrong again, Chet told himself ruefully. We don't die at the center of the moon after all. But as the whipping wings drove whirling blasts of violet light back upon him, he could find nothing of comfort in the thought that some different experiences still lay ahead. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gateway to Hell. Spud O'Malley at the controls of the ship held the craft in a vertical lift while his eyes clung in horrible fascination to the mirrors that showed from a lower lookout the volcanic floor falling away. Amazement had almost stifled his breathing until at last he let go a long breath that ended in a curse. The outrageous damn things, he breathed. Jumping they were, and leaping and flying on their leather wings like a lot of black bats out of hell. And I'm thinking that's where they've taken Chet Bullard, and never again will he hold a ship like 'twas in the hollow of his hand, and him setting it down like a feather. And fly back home, he says to me. I can do it too, thanks to his teaching, but I'll fly back and leave that boy in the hands of those murdering devils? 'Tis little he knows the Irish. He was talking half under his breath, murmuring to himself as if it helped him to see clearly the situation that must be faced. But to get to him, that's the trouble. I saw a big door go shut in that stone floor. They're cunning, clever beasts, I'll say that for 'em. And there was a raft of 'em, and plenty more down in hell where they live, I've no doubt. He moved forward on the ball control, and the great ship swept like a silvery shadow through the night toward the distant lighted crater rim. This he could see clearly, but the other side of the ring of mountains was black with shadow. And far out beyond, spread like a cloud over all the desolate world, was blackness. Spud drove the ship up another 5,000 feet, and still that darkness spread out in inky pools where only an occasional mountain peak caught the flat rays of the sun. And what had Chet called these dark areas? Lake of Dreams? Lake of Death? Spud's superstitious mind was aquiver with dread and ominous premonition, to which the empty frozen waste below him gave added force. I'll have to wait, he told himself. The light of the moon, I mean the earth, is bright, but not bright enough. I'll just wait till the sun climbs higher. When it shines down into that hole that is the gateway to hell, and well I know it, then I can see what is there. Then maybe I can find some way to get inside, and I hope the lad lives till I get there." He circled back, swept down in a long, leisurely flight, and came again to the place of gently sloping rock where Chet had first landed. And he searched till he found the identical spot and laid the ship down on a level keel. Far away the sun was gilding the hard outlines of mountains that ringed them in. Spud did not know how long he must wait. Had he realized that it must be a matter of days, it is probable he would have donned the metal suit and started out. But instead, he busied himself in a careful investigation of the storeroom and a checkup of ammunition and supplies that were there. The lunar day, as all Earthmen know, is a matter of nearly 15 of Earth's days. Spud O'Malley was wild with impatience when at last the sun was striking less flatly across the land, and he knew that the time had come when he could start. He had sensed the change that took place in the world outside. From the lookouts of the control room he had seen the bare rocks lose their white markings of hoar frost, and at last actually quiver with heat as the sun beat upon them. He had seen the growing things that crept from every crevice and hollow, pale, colorless mosses that threw out long tendrils which licked across the hot rocks as if hungry for the nourishment the thin air brought. Spud knew nothing of the carbon dioxide which these pale green growths could combine with water under the sun's hot rays and build into vegetable tissue. But he marveled again and again at the hungry things that made a mesh of ropey strands across the smooth area about the ship. They even hung in drooping masses from the weird rocks beyond, and so light they were, they raised their heads hungrily in air, while the corded tendrils even threw themselves in contorted writhings at times when the sun struck with increasing warmth. "A dead world," said Spud scornfully. "How much the scientists back there don't know. First those living, flying devils, and now this. The whole place is fairly wriggling with life." It was then that he made one last flight over the inner crater and saw light on the floor of stone in the funneled depths. Then he sent the ship like a rocket down to the shelf of rock where Chet had begun his descent, and he worked with trembling fingers to adjust the metal suit and regulate the oxygen supply. He waited only to strap a couple of detonite pistols about him. Then, with never a backward look, he let himself out through the airlocking doors and started pell-mell toward the inner crater. Like Chet, he had learned to gauge his tremendous strength. Like the master pilot, he threw himself down the rocky slope. But where Chet had leaped and stumbled in the darkness, O'Malley worked in full light. He came at last to the rocky floor, where molten stone in ages past had hardened to seal the throat of this vent. Hundreds of feet across, Spud estimated, smooth in appearance from above, but broken with deep crevices and excrescences where hot fluid stone had frozen in its moment of bubbling turbulence, and in one place where the floor was smooth, Spud found what he was searching for, a circular metal ledge that projected above the smooth rock, and within it a still smoother sheet of what appeared to be hammered metal. "The door it is," whispered the pilot, half fearful of listening ears, "and the gateway to hell." He grinned broadly at some thought. "And here I've been told 'twas of all places the easiest to get into. One little slip from grace, and there you were. Sure, and the priests were as wrong as the scientists. It must be heaven that's easy to crash, for the front door of Hades is shut fast without even a keyhole to peep through." Then his face sobered to its customary homely lines. "The poor boy!" he exclaimed. "I've got to get in some way. I wonder how hard and thick it is." He was raising a mass of black shining rock in his hands a fragment that his strength would not have moved a fraction of an inch on Earth. He steadied it above his head, preparing to crash it upon the metal door, then waited, stared incredulously at the black metal sheet, lowered the great stone silently, and turned to leap mightily, yet with never a sound, for the shelter of an upflung saw-toothed ridge. And from its shelter he watched the black door swing smoothly into the air, while, from the gaping black mouth of its pit beneath, incredible man shapes of fish belly white drew themselves up to the edge of the pit and perched there, where they might stretch their long necks into the light of the sun. Below them, Spud saw, dangled long rat-like tails, and their wings, black and leathery, hung down too from their backs or dragged on the rocks behind, where some 3 or 4 of the owl-eyed creatures crawled out and walked across the rock toward the place where an Irish pilot waited and stared with unbelieving and horrified eyes from the concealment of his rocky fort. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Finding of Haldgren by Charles Diffin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The fires. Great vortices of whirling light rolled out to either side in an endless pyrotechnical display to show the power of those flailing wings that were bearing Chet and his companion through the dark void, bearing them to some destination Chet could not envisage. His body turned in space at time, and he saw the spreading cone of luminous gas behind them like the wake of a great ship in a phosphorescent sea. The hiss and threshing of many wings came unceasingly. Once he swung close to another body clad like his own and like him enmeshed in a net, and he saw in the light of the luminiferous air the girl's wide staring eyes. Then she was gone, and all about was only the whip of wings and the flashing whirls of light. He tried to form some picture of this sphere through whose center, empty but for this gas, he was being swung. The first fall had carried him down the tube of some volcanic blowpipe. He had fallen straight for what seemed like hours, and that had been through the crust of this great hollow globe. Then the center, but of this he dared make no estimate. He knew only that the huge leather wings were threshing the dense air in an untiring rhythm, and that he was being carried for a tremendous distance at remarkable speed. It became soothing, that rushing, swinging sweep of his body through space. There was death ahead, without doubt. But what of that? He was sleepy, sleepy, and beyond this nothing mattered. Just to sleep, to drift off in spirit into a void like this through which he was swinging. And so traveled Chet Bullard, one time master pilot of Earth, through the heart of another world, on and endlessly on, while leather-winged demons dragged him after, flying straight away from the center of the moon toward a place and events unknown. But Chet Bullard had ceased to note the passing hours or the swirling gases that came alight at the beating of those wings. He was asleep in a stupor that was as deep as it was timeless. He opened his eyes at last. It seemed but a moment that he had slept. But now there was no rushing hiss of air, nor was he being lifted in a great net. He lay instead upon a support of some kind, and about him all was still. Not at first did he observe the exquisite carvings of the yellow bed on which he lay. That came later. The fact that its massive gold and its scrollwork of inlaid platinum were worth a fortune meant nothing to him then. His eyes were held by the immensity of the great room and the intricate series of arches